right pipes and whatnot for natural gas, but we didn't have the power to insist on that. And I think that that's the only way we're going to see a distribution network in place after a period of time, is by being proactive and putting it into the newer subdivisions as they come on stream, because especially here in HRM where there's so much rock, it's a lot of blasting. So the time to do it is when you're laying out the streets and putting in the essential services. So I think it's good to give the municipality the option at least of going that route. And also, I'd like to talk briefly about the daycare centers. Section 7 refers to changes in the assessment, or at least giving the municipalities the power to change the assessments for daycare centers. And I really hope that the municipalities will look at this. I realize it now becomes, something in their power to consider whether or not they can afford to do this. But daycare centers are fully taxed as commercial properties, and they also are charged business occupancy tax. And I think that that makes it very difficult in a service industry, an industry that's there to serve young families and to look after children. Whether they're for profit or not, there's very little margin of profit in daycare centers. They're very vulnerable to going out of business because of the costs. And there is a maximum to what you can charge parents. Even if you are a for-profit daycare center, there's only so much you can charge. And therefore, they can't recoup that extra money. And I think many of them would much rather see that go into higher salaries, because they have difficulty retaining staff that are qualified, because they pay such really very low wages for qualified trained people. And so by taking some of that burden of taxation off of daycare centers, I think it would be a real, definitely a mark of confidence in the work that those daycare centers are doing, and recognizing the importance of their work, and recognizing that they compete head-on with at-home daycares, people who have up to 14 children in their own homes, and they often are done without the acknowledgement that they are in fact operating daycare centers. So that's where very many children are looked after, and it's not a level playing field. So I think the fact that that's now in the Act, that would, if this does go forward and pass, that will give municipalities an opportunity to help the daycare centers, which I might add are also charged HST for all of their purchases. And the public daycare centers are entitled to get a portion of that HST back, but the private daycare centers are not, and that can cost them literally thousands of dollars a year too. So they're in a very unique situation, and I think the service that they provide to the young families in our province needs to be recognized, and I think that's a very positive improvement as well in here. There's one thing I'd like to mention that I think would be very good to have in here, which is not, and that would be a strengthening of the municipalities' right to, and this is really an HRM issue, I should say, but it's for tree retention, and it affects private property rights. And with development in HRM, there's been an awful lot of denuding of entire lots, whether it be large subdivisions or even large lots that are being redeveloped. The trees are taken down, completely. And then there's a little bit of landscaping done at the end of the agreement, maybe by development agreement, and if they follow through on it. And there's a lot of sensitivity in HRM about the loss of trees. It had come up at HRM Council, and I know one of the councillors in particular, Linda Mosier, had organized and asked, I believe, I'm hoping she's asked the government to include that at some point in time about private property rights related to tree retention. And I would like the government to think about that. Maybe that could be an amendment that could be added after we hear about it at law amendments. But I think it's a really good package of changes based on what the municipalities have been asking for, and we do look forward to hearing the people that may come to speak at law amendments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. We recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations. Closed debate on Bill number 70. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the members opposite for their helpful interventions and their support of this bill. And I'm pleased to close debate and move second reading of Bill number 7.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 70. Is the House ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 70, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act, Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act, and Chapter 302 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Grants Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 67?
Bill number 67, House Assembly Act. Honourable Deputy Premier.
Minister of Justice, I move second reading of Bill number 67, the House of Assembly Act.
House ready. Order, please. Motion is for second reading of Bill number 67. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 67, title and act to amend Chapter 1, 1992 supplement of the Revised Statutes 1989, the House of Assembly Act.
Proposed bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honorable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 74, the oil refineries and LNG plants?
Bill number 74, the Honorable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Relations.
Be on your feet. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to open debate on Bill number 74, an act respecting municipal taxation of oil refineries and liquefied natural gas plants. I will take a few moments to speak briefly to Bill number 74. This bill enables the government to establish the tax bill for Imperial Oil's refinery in Dartmouth. It enables the government through regulation to establish a tax bill for a future liquefied natural gas plant somewhere in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the intent of this bill, or this piece of legislation, is to provide, first of all, an opportunity for Nova Scotia to compete on a level playing field with its abutters with respect to liquefied natural gas plant. We want to ensure that Nova Scotia is seen as a good place to locate such a facility, and that Nova Scotia is at least a competitive level playing field, or possibly even an advantage to attract a new liquefied natural gas facility. As well, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Imperial Oil taxation, as members would know, Imperial Oil was facing a significant increase in their municipal tax bill that would see them pay a tax increase of nearly fourfold. They had indicated to government that this put them at a significant disadvantage and that it jeopardized future plans with respect to that facility. Mr. Speaker, there are 220 good-paying jobs at that facility with an average payroll of over $23 million. If you do that math, it averages out at about $100,000 per paycheck. This job in the local economy, or this plant in the local economy, is critically important to Halifax Regional Municipality. But, Mr. Speaker, the one thing that we are first and foremost concerned about is protecting Nova Scotia's only refinery for diesel fuel and gasoline. This plant is the lone remaining refinery for Nova Scotia. At one point in our history, we had 3 refineries, one in the Port Hawkesbury area and 2 in Dartmouth. However, the business climate over the past number of years, decades, has seen that two of those refineries close, and it leaves Nova Scotia in a position where we have one refinery refining fuel for our entire market. Mr. Speaker, our government fully understood the impact that would have on consumers in the event we had to import every bit of that fuel for our local market, and we believe that it's absolutely critical that government support this refinery to the point where we enable the municipality to grow its tax base. In this case, they're receiving $1.4 million more, but we as well maintain this particular piece of infrastructure so that Nova Scotians don't see a dramatic impact as a result of not having fuel produced here at home. Mr. Speaker, with that, I would wait for the interventions of the members opposite, and I encourage members to support this piece of legislation.
Now, member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this bill. This, I think, is one of those bills that I've heard about that leaves everybody firmly stuck on the horns of a dilemma, and I would hope that in the Law Amendments Committee we will find our way off at least one of the horns of that dilemma. There are a lot of things to be said for and against this bill, but having said that, it's certainly a bold move in a direction which the province has been taking baby steps for some length of time. In support of it, I think that one of the most important things to recognize is that the bill is an important way of protecting Nova Scotian jobs. As we know, there have been stringent efforts made to protect and even to create Nova Scotian jobs, some of which are of considerably less monetary value to the people who hold those jobs, to the families supported by those jobs, and to the economies surrounding the families supported by the people who hold those jobs. one cannot say that these are marginal jobs. And in the case of some of the payroll rebates which have been given by the province more recently, they are most certainly marginal jobs. It's also worth noting that this particular refinery has been in place for quite a length of time. Therefore, there is some reliance within the community on the jobs created by the refinery, as well as on the tax base created by the refinery. Most importantly, however, I think one should be aware that the taxes which were expected in the coming year by the Halifax Regional Municipality had not yet materialized. This is not a removal of taxes from the HRM tax base. It's a case of a bird in the hand being worth two in the bush, or perhaps a municipality counting eggs that have not yet hatched. And we are seeing more and more of that happening in municipalities throughout this province. I think that is because, philosophically, we have a habit, a long-standing habit, it would appear, of taxing static property value. It's related, I believe, very closely to the taxation of residential properties on their estimated fair market value, even though there may be no income realized from the current use of a given property. We are talking about a similar shift, and I must point out here that I am talking at the moment those points which are in favor of this bill and which merit further consideration. We are talking about a shift from taxing static property and equipment value to taxation on the basis of production capacity. We have been told, and I would like to find out more about this, that preventing the property tax from rising as it would have by $6 million will in fact serve to reduce the cost, the per barrel cost of the Imperial Oil Refinery's oil down by almost $30 a barrel. It's hard not to imagine that that does have an impact on the competitiveness of the refinery, as well as potentially on the price paid by Nova Scotians for this product. It is true that there were 3 refineries in Nova Scotia not very long ago. There is only 1 refinery remaining now. Again, I would like to get confirmation of the figures about the barrel price, but I do think that we should be aware that 2 refineries have left. We are left with 1, and the point is made that we should protect in-province reliance as much as possible. Most importantly, what has been done here in terms of improvements to the refinery and its equipment is environmental compliance measures. $80 million were put into this plant to ensure that lower sulfur emissions would be resulting. Does that $80 million in fact add to the taxable value of the refinery? Perhaps if it is sold as a refinery, it does add to the taxable value. But we are talking at the moment purely about property. The old machinery and equipment taxes are no longer here. And we are, I think it would be unwise for the province to permit a continually escalating rate of property tax to, in effect, penalize companies of no matter what sort for improving their environmental performance. The fact of the matter is that a structure like a refinery has an impact on the environment of all of us, not only on the citizens of the municipality where it is located, By the same token, the prices which are charged, the jobs which are created, have an impact which spreads far beyond the boundaries of the municipality in which this particular piece of, I would say, infrastructure is located. It is important that the province maintains some aspect of involvement with this. Having said this, however, we should look at what other kinds of tax incentives and rebates may have been made available to the refinery already for its compliance. It is not a question of the environmental improvements adding to the property value, but adding to the quality of life value. What we need to do is to see whether that has already been rewarded at the federal level before we decide whether or not it should be rewarded at the municipal level, or at least whether there should be a brake put on further taxation because of that. Having said that, I would like to note as well, as I referred to earlier, that this really is the tip of a philosophical iceberg, which is about whether or not we should be taxing the static value, the unchanged value of property and property within the province, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential. We have been looking at the possibility of amendments to residential property taxation because escalating property values are penalizing those who choose to stay in places they have had for a considerable length of time and yet have not changed the use or the resale value even of their property. To me, it seems on the face of it a progressive move that we should look at the productivity of land, the uses to which it is put, rather than simply its square footage and its proximity to land which someone else may be putting to a very different and very much more enriching use. We have been pressing individuals out of their homes by virtue of this fact, or forcing them to exploit the property which they have in their hands to a far, far higher degree than would otherwise be necessary, simply in order to maintain their place, to tread water. We should perhaps think twice before we begin doing this as well to commercial industries of long-standing virtue. This is not the same as saying it adds to the productive capacity. Where a plant expands, where a plant begins generating more income, then there should be a firm look at higher taxation. However, we need, as I say, to know more about this. I am glad to see that this bill looks at future increases being pegged to the Consumer Price Index. This is something that we suggested last fall in connection with residential property assessments. And as you may have noticed, sometimes there's an economic driver which takes the front seat and goes, pulling everything else along with it. I think perhaps of the experience of cars, the cost of new cars, which has escalated far beyond any CPI, began doing so some 20 years ago and has taken everything along with it, almost throughout the North American economy. We do not want property assessments to become a force of their own, to become a ravening monster which eats the people and the industries which already exist here. The CPI is a reasonable way of putting a brake, but not a complete brake, on the rising value of tax base. It's predictable, and predictability is also a good thing for the economic climate of the province as well. Taking the long view, I think that companies which may be established, or perhaps may in future establish themselves, would be reassured to feel that there is a recognition of their commercial venture, their commercial capacity, but that perhaps it is not subject, their property taxation as well is not subject to the vagaries of the local real estate market or to a required compliance with environmental amelioration. Is it fair that Imperial Oil should receive a break of either kind, EAK or AKE, when assessment rates for homeowners' taxes continue to climb? No, of course it's not. We should be fixing the whole problem. And having said this, HRM has argued that this is a clawback, but is this a clawback, or is this in fact a denial of an increase in taxation income? Is this an economic development initiative? Is this an economic rescue strategy? I am not sure. We will need to consult further with the Halifax Regional Municipality on the impact of this $600,000 decrease in their anticipated revenue for the coming year. We will need to know more about other tax rebates or credits which the refinery may have received at the federal level. But we do not want, I think one of the most important messages is that whatever the decision may be on this, whatever the mechanism may be, we should not be seen as punishing Nova Scotian initiatives for environmental responsibility. And with that, I would say I look forward to this bill arriving at law amendments, because I have absolutely no doubt there will be many people trying to pull us off one of the horns of this dilemma. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. I recognize the member for Victoria Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 74, Oil Refineries and LNG Plants Municipal Taxation Act. The bill is an attempt, Mr. Speaker, by the government to protect the jobs at the Imperial Oil Refinery in Eastern Passage. The government feels Imperial Oil may not be willing to pay the increased assessment levied upon them by the province. Mr. Speaker, our party has advocated for years that Nova Scotia must maintain a competitive advantage over other jurisdictions in order to attract and maintain investment. One advantage in this case, however, is a significant investment in physical infrastructure which Imperial has made in the facility in Eastern Passage. A decision to walk away from hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure would not and should not be made lightly, Mr. Speaker. The government has to analyze the risk of Imperial leaving Nova Scotia and act if the risk is real. And I'm sure the government has done the evaluation and has spoken to the employer and the employees before bringing the bill forward. I'd love to hear what the minister has to say on this issue, Mr. Speaker, and I heard some of what he had previously said on the introduction. I wonder what the mayor's reaction to this idea was during the government consultation. And I am wondering if at all did the province consider a consultation with Mayor Kelly. Why has the government found it necessary to reach into the pockets of HRM to protect the jobs, Mr. Speaker? And why has the government not considered using one of the many other business incentives which is at their disposal? If you want to protect jobs, why not offer the company a payroll reduction? Why not offer Imperial a corporate tax holiday of some kind as an incentive to remain in Nova Scotia? Mr. Speaker, again I say, why dip into the pockets of HRM? The provincial government has stood in this House day in and day out and touted their track record on employment. But when it's time to stand up and take action and protect jobs, their idea is to make the HRM municipality pay for it. Mr. Speaker, don't think for one moment that the minister would not be going door to door or be at the door of the refinery the next day if this bill passes, taking credit for protecting the jobs. Since they have introduced the bill, we can assume that the government feels the risk is real and steps must be taken to protect these jobs. I have to wonder why the government didn't find it necessary to step in and protect the jobs at Britex or Avon Foods, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it makes you wonder if their support for rural economic development is real, or if in fact they are concentrating all their efforts on the urban centers. We understand the government's concern in this particular situation and their desire to take action. But is the government taking the right steps, Mr. Speaker? We know the contentious item is the assessment of the refinery and the recent increases in assessed value. But the provincial government is not the government who collects the taxes, Mr. Speaker. It's the municipal government. It's the government of HRM. So in effect, what the provincial government is doing with this bill is saying we increased the assessment, we are now worried about protecting the jobs at the refinery, so we will introduce a law that will affect the municipal government. Mr. Speaker, when in fact all this government has done is brought in a law that requires the municipality to pay to keep Imperial in the province. I believe we are going to hear quite a bit of testimony from Mayor Kelly and the management of Imperial Oil at law amendments. I look forward to hearing from them in a timely fashion so that if changes need to be made to this bill, as I suspect there may be, they will be done during this session. Mr. Speaker, I want to express my concerns on this bill and make people aware that other tools are available to the government outside of downloading on HRM. The province hasn't taken any of the provincial economic tools that they have at their disposal. You reward through payroll rebates and tax incentives, Mr. Speaker. What about even sharing the cost? No. Download it on the municipalities. I've felt that for years, and this is another example of it. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand that Imperial's profit in Canada last year was $60 million, and I'm looking forward of supporting the bill to go to law amendments because I can't wait to see what's going to happen in law amendments. We're very, very interested to see what other people are affected by this bill and what they will have to say. And with that, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm looking forward to the bill going to law amendments, and I'll conclude my remarks.
Now, member for Halifax Clayton Park.
I think it's important just to say a few words on this because of the impact to HRM and to the tax rate here in HRM. The fact is that because the improvements were made to the refinery, there was every intention and every reason for the municipality to expect that their taxes would be higher and that they could therefore budget for that. They're very careful and cautious in what they do put in their budgets. So the fact that it's rolled back, it may still be new and additional revenue to HRM, but there will be projects that were planned for the municipality, and we get very few in the way of recreation or new playgrounds or new streets that are paved. Those kind of projects, and maybe it'll be the new sport field for Dartmouth, may in fact be threatened because the money isn't there in this year's budget. So I think it's really important that we look at that and that we say very clearly that the provincial government hasn't used the tools that are available and really within the mandate of the provincial government in taxation. You have stepped into the municipal arena and affected the revenues to the municipality here. And there are other and more appropriate avenues or mechanisms that you could have used to spur economic development. And I'm not criticizing at all the aim of the bill. The bill aims to keep an active refinery in our province, and it aims to protect jobs. And again, I would say that if the risk is real, I'm sure that is the reason why it is before us today, that we're looking at a bill like this. And none of us want to see either the loss of the refinery or loss of jobs. And from an economic development point of view, we also don't want to see that the refinery in Nova Scotia is operating at a very uncompetitive level of taxation, as was indicated in the press release from the Minister of Municipal Relations. indicating in this press release that the taxes paid on this particular Imperial Oil refinery is quadruple the amount paid by a much larger Irving refinery in St. John. So certainly that's not good for our competitiveness, and that is one of the important tenets that we've been working towards, is to make Nova Scotia competitive always for business and corporations. So I think that the main thing is that there are other ways to do that, whether it's through the payroll rebates, through corporate tax changes that are made directly. The kind of taxation, the revenue that we rely on as a province, those are the revenues that should be looked at rather than the municipality. Now, I notice in the press release as well that there's discussion at the end. The minister says that there will be a review, that the province will undertake a review of the province's assessment and taxation policies of heavy industrial properties. And I think that is more than called for if, in fact, this bill goes forward, because this bill basically opens Pandora's box, because it's specific to one property and one potential future property on the liquefied natural gas. But it opens that Pandora's box because every large industrial operation in the province will feel that they have probably a good case as well to come before the government and ask for a special bill that would outline what they require. And we'll find ourselves inundated with those kind of requests provincially. And I think that it's the wrong way to go, that we have to at least have a plan. And so the suggestion by the minister that his department will conduct that review, I think, is important. But I think it needs to be done in a very timely fashion if this bill goes forward, because really we can't leave a situation like this not properly addressed, and we have to be able to identify what criteria we're going to use in order to support some industries and not others. As my colleague has mentioned, what did we do about Britex or Avon Foods? There were jobs at stake there as well, and maybe a change in the municipal taxation might have made a difference. It might have been just tipped the scales enough for those operations to stay in business. So it's important to know what criteria we would use to apply any such favorable status in terms of municipal taxation. And I also think it's really important that when this comes to law amendments, we hear from many municipalities, it shouldn't just be HRM, because the other municipalities stand to be treated in the same way, and they should be very alert to the fact that this opens up a new chapter in municipal and provincial relations. So I think that we need to be aware of what it might mean to that future taxation. And with that, I will sit down and look forward to hearing more at law amendments. You better hop right up, because he's ready to go.
Recognized now, Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, be to close debate on Bill number 74. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I close debate, I just want to point out a couple of points to the members opposite. First of all, this bill is not simply about protecting the jobs of those 220 people who work at Imperial Oil. This bill is about providing Nova Scotia with a competitive advantage, or at least a level playing field with respect to the liquefied natural gas. And it's also about protecting Nova Scotia's economy. Mr. Speaker, I believe, and this government believes, that if we were to lose this refinery, and hope that the refinery would be able to stand a fourfold tax increase in their municipal tax bill, that it would have a devastating impact on Nova Scotia's economy. And we weren't prepared as a government to sit by and watch that happen. This is not a bill that takes any tax revenue from a municipality. This is a bill that moderates an increase. That's what it's about. It's about moderating the increase to $1.4 million, not about taking tax money away. As a former municipal councillor, I fully understand the impact these types of decisions have on those municipalities. That's why I took the time, 3.5 hours, to explain the impact of this and what we were proposing to Halifax Regional Council. And I'm pleased that a number of the members of council understood clearly what the impact was. And although they weren't completely satisfied or pleased, they understood exactly why government had to move in that direction. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my opening remarks, just 2 decades ago, we had 3 oil refineries producing fuel for the Nova Scotia market here in Nova Scotia. Now we have 1 refinery. In fact, if this refinery would be to close, we would be forced in a situation where we'd be importing all of our fuel. And my speculation, Mr. Speaker, is that the current sticker price and the shock that we see of the fuel prices at the pumps today, without a source of fuel here at home, would be substantial. And I think Nova Scotians would be pointing the finger of blame squarely at legislators and members of this House and saying, you could have done something, you should have done something, and we would have been derelict in our duty not to stand up and protect Nova Scotia's interest. This bill is all about protecting the interest of the jobs and the economy of Nova Scotia. It's about protecting those 220 jobs, and it's about looking to a bright and prosperous future with an LNG plant somewhere located in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to close debate on second reading of Bill number 74.
Motion is second reading of Bill number 74. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 74, entitled An Act Respecting the Municipal Taxation of Oil Refineries and Liquefied Natural Gas Plants.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Would you please call Bill number 72, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act?
Bill number 72, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise and speak briefly on this bill. However, before I do so, I would wonder if you would permit me an introduction. We have visitors this evening in the gallery from, in fact, ironically, a municipal unit, in this case, the municipality of the District of Lunenburg, Warden Jack Wenzel and Deputy Warden Elmer Garber. They're here watching today's proceedings, and I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Guest gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is quite simple. Mr. Speaker, this bill is a bill to implement one of the recommendations of the review committee that was created under the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. Mr. Speaker, I am hoping that this bill will receive the quick approbation of members of the House so that we can implement the reduction in fees that is anticipated by this bill. And quite simply, Mr. Speaker, we are committed to implementing that portion of the committee's recommendation as it reflects to the reduction of fees, and we hope that this bill will move from this House and will move through the House and will indeed go to third reading. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage all members to support the bill so that we can move it on to committee this evening. And with that, I'd move second reading of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
You know, Member Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to speak for a few moments on Bill number 72. Mr. Speaker, this bill is, again, much like the one, Bill 68, that we talked about on Friday, another example of the difference between last spring and this spring when we had an election that resulted in a minority government. It was only last spring that this government would not allow any changes to the Freedom of Information Act, even though our party and the Liberal Party introduced amendments to deal with the fees. There is concrete evidence from the review officer, Mr. Speaker, that this act as it now is, with the fees that have been put in place, and the two here, obviously, one involving 2 hours free, which is going to be brought back in, and the appeal application fee, which will be reduced, Mr. Speaker, or eliminated. But there's a third one, and that is the fee for actually applying has gone up to $25, Mr. Speaker. And as far as we're concerned, if this bill is, we're glad to support this at second reading. But I can assure you, it's our caucus's intent when we get this to Law Amendments or Committee of the Whole, given this is a minority government, we're keen on ensuring that we move amendments to make sure we roll back everything that needs to be done. We've heard from the review officer, Mr. Fardy, about the number of applications, how they've plummeted because this government, which was considered last year one of the most secret governments in Canada, if not the most secret government, Mr. Speaker, this government, after a minority, is now coming forward with changes, something that I know they would not have done if they had won a majority in that election last spring, Mr. Speaker, summer. So what we have is a situation where, in a minority government, we're more than glad to see this bill, but we would also encourage the Minister of Justice, the government House Leader, to recognize the fact that in a minority House, when you bring a bill forward, it's our understanding and our trust that this will be brought to third reading based on amendments that we may make, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Now, Member Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I'm not going to speak much longer. Just to reiterate the point that we would like to see an amendment to this bill to ensure that all the fees are rolled back, to reopen up the Freedom of Information Act, which this minister from time to time likes to brag is so excellent. Well, it hasn't been since we introduced these fee increases. 2 down, 1 to go, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my predecessor who just spoke, the House Leader for the official opposition, said that it was since the election that brought this bill forward, and I had a different take. I figured it was this government's been embarrassed enough by both the media and by outside provinces and outside observers who have criticized this government repeatedly for its secrecy, and in fact I believe they won the distinction, the dubious distinction of the most secretive government in the nation. So what a thing to be proud of. You know, ironically, we're talking about having a few more sites designated as World Heritage sites, while this coming from a province that was deemed to be the most secretive government in all of the country. So I would like to think that there's a bit of finally some humility from this government after having been embarrassed as to what it's done, and especially on the heels of the most recent annual report from the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Officer, which clearly showed once again that the applications have gone down dramatically again last year as a result of the regressive fees that were put in place by the government. Allow me to submit to you again, Mr. Speaker, this government must have known that by putting up the fees to where they put them, applications would go down dramatically. And for the government to suggest that it would only be frivolous applications that would be done away with, it is clear that that is not the case. Nova Scotians who have a legitimate right to seek government information were turned away due to the high cost of doing so. We have various experiences, and it's not only coming from the partisan members here. We've heard it from the review officer himself, who has shown in his report that the fees were directly to blame for the decrease in applications and for the lack of government information that was getting out. Speaker, we've been very clear, our party, on the record here. We've tabled legislation which would roll back the fees, bring the application back to $5, which is reasonable, both not only for the opposition parties, interest groups, organizations, and Nova Scotians in general who are seeking information from this government. The government has taken some steps to make information available, but they have not come nearly close enough. We hear the Premier repeatedly saying, don't bother filing freedom of information requests, they're too expensive, they take too much time, just pick up the phone and call. And more our staff keeps calling and keeps being told, file a freedom of information request. So, Mr. Speaker, this is an important first step. We do look forward to it going to law amendments, but I can also signal to the Minister, as my good friend, the House Leader for the official opposition has, that our party will also be looking for added amendments to the Freedom of Information Act so that we can once again be known as I believe we are the first province to have brought in the Freedom of Information Act in the country. I think it's time we go back to being known as the province with the most accessible Freedom of Information Act rather than the province known as the most secretive in this country. I think all Nova Scotians would be proud, and I think this is the bill where we can achieve that and we can show how well minority government can work for Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice be to close debate on Bill number 72. Honourable Minister of Justice.
And I appreciate the support that my colleagues have given for moving this bill forward to law amendment. It's a good bill as written, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to their support. Thank you.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 72. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 72, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 5 of the Acts of 1993, the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act.
Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call Bill number 73, the Justice Administration Amendment 2004 Act?
Bill number 73, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my great pleasure to rise to briefly speak to this bill. Mr. Speaker, this is actually one of a long line of Justice Administration Amendment Acts that have been introduced into this House by the government. And these are a series of omnibus bills designed to deal with matters that have arisen typically over the last 6 months to a year that require the attention of the House. This bill is no different in the sense that it deals with a number of different pieces of legislation, sometimes dealing with minor changes in terminology, as for example in the Crane Operators and Power Engineers Act, where there has been a change in terminology from the term stationary engineer to power engineer, and that this legislation is would be proposed to be amended to do that. There are other provisions in the Education Act, for example, which make it clear that municipal units can go together in order to support community facilities in other municipal units, and that kind of cooperation between municipal units is something, Mr. Speaker, that members of this House can encourage as a very important initiative, Mr. Speaker. There are obviously the provisions dealing with the Election Act, dealing with the issue of the qualifications for the Chief Electoral Officer, and also, Mr. Speaker, provisions in the Elections Act dealing with exigent circumstances around vacancies with returning officers, because, as we all know, it takes a long time to implement the appropriate hiring practices to fill a job permanently, and this is designed to cover a situation so that the Chief Electoral Officer can make sure that elections operate in the way that they're supposed to. Then, of course, there's the Flea Market Regulation Act. Mr. Speaker, that provision is quite simply to iron out, and you'll excuse the metaphor, the bugs that some enforcement officials, both police and public prosecution service, had found in the previous legislation, so that we can move towards eliminating stolen goods being fenced at flea markets. And that's really the purpose of this legislation, is nothing more than that, Mr. Speaker. There's the Interior Designers Act. That is a minor change requested by that professional organization, Mr. Speaker. There are the Labor Standards Code, and that is simply to ensure a consistent application of the Act fundamentally to full and part-time workers, so that those workers who choose to take time in lieu can receive the 6% that they would be entitled to in vacation. And it's simply a matter of allowing workers, particularly part-time workers, who tend to take advantage of that provision to receive receive the 6% vacation pay after 8 years, in the same way that they could receive the 3 weeks vacation. The Motor Vehicle Act, as was indicated during the press briefing earlier today, that provisions are to implement some recommendations arising out of the Johnson inquiry, so that the law is clear in Nova Scotia, and again, that's a practical thing. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is to, I guess, confirm the practice of paying people who sit on that board, who dedicate an awful lot of time. Obviously, members of the House value that work, and I'm sure will support that provision. Ombudsman's Act, again, is to implement those protections, to extend the protections of the Ombudsman's Office to other government organizations, again, consistent. The Provincial Court Judges Act, Provincial Court Act is to raise the retirement age from 65 to 70 for our provincial and family court judges. Mr. Speaker, the Public Service Act is to deal with a very technical requirement, generally with respect to ministers being out of province. The Special Places Protection Act, again, is an environmental piece of legislation to ensure that land, when designated, when it passes to a subsequent owner, whether by tax deed or otherwise, maintains that protection that the original owner had intended for the protection of the environment. So that's a very, very brief summary of the provisions of that act, Mr. Speaker. Again, I would obviously like the support of honourable members to move this bill through second reading into committee in hopes that, again, these beneficial changes would be made law. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd move second reading. Thank you.
Recognize all member Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to speak for very long, but I think it's important to put on the record that when you look at Bill number 73, substantively, some of these are technical changes, some of them are a little more substantive. None of them are earth-shattering. But I think it's the principle, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to speak to, which is the use of these omnibus acts. It's called a Justice Administration Act when, in fact, we have Labor Standards Code, we have the Education Act, we have the Ombudsman Act, we have the Public Service Act. These acts, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest as a form of democratic principle to a great extent as possible should be brought into this House on an individual basis so we have an opportunity to debate the merit of them. And on top of that, the people out there who may hear about it will also have a chance to debate it, Mr. Speaker. The Minister read off 10, 12 acts that are being amended, Mr. Speaker, and I would suggest to you that that is too much probably for most of the members in this House to have time to review, let alone people in the electorate. Mr. Speaker, as a principle, we're concerned about this. I would have hoped in a minority government the government would have changed. We only meet 9 weeks a year, Mr. Speaker, you know. If they had introduced these bills separately, maybe it would take a little more time to be able to debate these, so we'd have a chance to debate them on their merits, Mr. Speaker. I'm disappointed in that, but we're prepared to see it go to law amendments to hear from the stakeholders.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise as Justice Critic for the Liberal Caucus on Bill number 73. And we were speaking earlier, myself and the House Leader for the NDP, and it's an issue that which I have been raising since 1999 when this government first came in power. And if one goes back through Hansard, every time a Justice Administration Act was brought in, I gave the same speech. It is not appropriate to be bringing in a bill that's going to change, in this case, I believe, 13 provincial statutes in one bill. Mr. Speaker, that is something that is done by majority government when it's trying to ram through changes to a lot of legislation rather than going through it one piece at a time. I remember in the early days in 1999, there were stuff buried in the Justice Administration Acts that until we went through, pulled out the other acts and saw some of the changes taking place, they were not administrative or clerical type changes, they were significant types of changes. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are options here for us as an opposition in this minority situation. It is possible to block this bill, if for nothing else, to send a message to this minister and to this government that he needs to start doing things differently in a minority situation. As was said from the House Leader NDP, we are not here for months at a time, we are here for weeks. There's no reason why these changes could not have been broken down into separate bills. In the end of the day, for the government, one would even think they'd want to do so, to be able to claim at the end of the session that they've passed that many more bills. Rather than just one in this case, they could claim they've passed 13 bills in this one. In this case, as was said, they are, for the most part, administrative and smaller type changes. But in the past, if one wants to look in 1999, 2000, 2001, forward, the Justice Administration Acts were much longer, were much more comprehensive, the changes that they brought forward, and had much greater impact on the legislation it sought to change. It is time, and I hope that through this the Minister will hear the message we are sending to him. Get rid of the Justice Administration Acts, and let's not see another one coming in 2005 or in the fall of 2004. In this case, I think it's fair to say, barring something at law amendments, this bill will more than likely go forward. But under minority government, we expect better. It's not asking for too much, but as parliamentarians, we have a responsibility to deal with all changes to legislation in a prudent fashion, in a timely fashion, but to also be able to take our time and not have them rush through, having one bill here changing 13 provincial statutes. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I hope the message is clear. I hope we do not have to forcefully send a message the next time this happens, and I hope the Minister will be more respectful of the concerns raised by the opposition parties in this case. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice. Close debate in Bill 73. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the comments of my colleagues across the House. Somewhat, the difficult situation is sometimes if I did bring in 13 bills, then the cynical side of me would have thought that there might have been those who stood up and would have said, aha, he's trying to pad the payroll, so to speak, by doing that. In any event, there was no such intent. I think that the matters dealt with in this bill would be not exactly housekeeping, because there are some matters of substance in here, but they're matters of what I would describe as largely I hoped, uncontroversial nature, and that was that spirit in which the bill was brought forward in an attempt to deal with matters that were largely uncontroversial, which would have, I hoped and expected, the support of members on both sides of the House. It was in that spirit that the bill was brought in. I've heard the honourable member's comments, and we'll see if we can try to tailor the future to more of that. There may be a necessity, of course, to deal with more than one statute in a bill. Oftentimes, for example, bills do that by principle, but we will see if we can make sure that we work with our members on both sides of the House in the legislative process. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would close debate on second reading.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 73. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Bill 73, entitled An Act Respecting the Administration of Justice.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move that you do now leave the chair and the House resolve in the committee of the whole House on bills.
Is it agreed?
Agreed.
Recognize the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call Bill number 49, the Mi'kmaq Education Act?
Bill number 49, the Mi'kmaq Education Act. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Just thank you, Chairman. Just to refresh the memory of the members of the House, what this act does, it enables the Bear River First Nation to set up its own school system, and it would then be similar to, I think it's 9 other of the First Nations communities in the province.
Thank you. Question? Ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary minded? Motion carried. Oh, sorry. All right. Sorry, member, does the clause carry? Oh, I'll recognize the House Leader for the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I just want to make it clear that we have to ask for, does the bill carry, do the clauses carry, does the title carry?
I understand that.
Okay.
Thank you. Does the clause carry? Does the title carry? Does the bill carry? Thank you. Carried. Agreed? I need a... Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chair, would you please call Bill number 50, the Credit Union Act?
Bill number 50, the Credit Union Act. Questions be called for? Shall the clause carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. Bill is carried. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, would you please call Bill number 51, the Provincial Acadian Day Act?
Bill number 51, the Provincial Acadian Day Act. Shall the clause carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Bill is carried. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Chair, I move that that your committee do now rise and report these bills.
Chairman of the Committee on the Whole House and Bills reports.
Committee's met. Chairman's been instructed to recommend 3 bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment, those being bills numbered 49, 50, and 51.
Order these bills be read a third time at a future date. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I move that the House do now rise to meet again tomorrow at the hour of 12 noon. The House will sit from 12 until 8 p.m., and the order of business will be a question period followed by 4 hours of estimates, and then there will be public bills third reading and public bills for second reading. Speaker, I move the House to now rise.
Motion is the House adjourn to 12 noon tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House adjourned to 12 noon tomorrow.